Hi, and welcome to Worcestershire Homebrew Club's 5th birthday meet. It's crazy. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. 5 years ago, it feels like yesterday that we all met for the first time. And there's still some of the guys here from that very first meet, which is great. So as becoming a bit of a tradition, on our birthday meet, we like to get a special guest. So I am super pleased to say that Marshall and Cade from the Brulosophy podcast has agreed to come and have a chat with us tonight. And we've reached out to them and sort of asked if we could have a little bit of a chat about how homebrew clubs can sort of, kind of, in a nutshell, manage their own experiments, I guess. And Worcestershire Homebrew Club, we do quite a few sort of comparison brews that we call them, which is where we sort of take a particular element of the brewing or a particular piece of equipment or a particular ingredient, etc., and we compare that in different brews. So I thought, we could have a bit of a chat about how homebrew clubs can maybe sort of use some of the experience that the Brulosophy guys has got, and how we could sort of like bring that into our own club and some of our own experiments. So Marshall, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Worcestershire Homebrew Club. And
thank you for having us. Yeah, and happy birthday. I mean, 5 years. That's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah, excellent. It is.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting us. It's pretty cool to join an English homebrew club.
Excellent. Yeah, great. Thanks for coming along.
I wish we could be there in person. I'll say that.
Oh, that would be awesome. Wouldn't it?
Future years, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so shall we crack on with the discussion then? And I want this to, I think Marshall and Cade have sort of said the same, that it's a bit of a discussion. It's not sort of it's not sort of like expecting answers. It's a bit of a discussion about how we go about things and how we can go about things. And like I say, building on the experience that the Brulosophy guys have got as well, and looking at maybe how we can use that, or other homebrew clubs can use that in the sort of the brews that they do as a club. It'd be great. So I'm going to ask Kev Andrews to chip in first and kick us off with the first topic. Cheers, Kev.
Hi, gents. You okay? Good stuff. Okay, so my kind of question, or what we'll start with, is around kind of equipment profiles. So as a club, we do quite a few comparison brews and that kind of thing. And in terms of equipment profiles, we've got everything from your traditional kind of cool box, mash tun, 3-vessel setups to, Dan's good old fashioned brew in the bag, which I know you do as well, Marshall. And then we've got the grain father all-in-one system. So when we do our comparison brews, it's what can we kind of do to minimize the impact of using various equipment profiles to kind of get the best results, really, or the most true results.
Yeah, I'll kick this one off. A few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I had a whole bunch of friends of mine locally, all homebrewers, all still brewing these days. I gave them all the same exact amount of grain, the same exact amount of hops, all from the same sack of grain, same bag of hops, same yeast. I hooked them up with everything. The only thing that was different was our brewing systems and arguably the water that we were using to brew these beers. I think it was 5 of my 5 friends, myself included, and all of those beers were massively different from each other. They looked different, they smelled different, despite being the same exact recipe with the same exact process. So I'm not sure the best way to answer that, other than perhaps those comparison brews, I think, are super valuable because they help us to kind of determine what our house character might be. And we speak of house characters as being kind of those things, that thing that kind of ties one person's beers all together all the time. Oftentimes I think that's a positive thing because it makes that beer unique. The only way that we've found in the 8 years that we've been doing this stuff to keep things exactly consistent is to make sure that the systems that the beers are being brewed on are exactly the same and brewed by the same brewer. So other than that, I'm not sure there's a really good way to, like, if you're trying to do a comparative experiment on a very specific variable the way Brulosophy does, let's say it's mash temperature, it would be almost impossible if those beers taste different, which I suspect they would, to say that it was because of mash temperature and not some other of the 50 other variables that are different between those two brewing systems. So unless you've got two people who are diehards and want to have exactly the same equipment and get water from the same exact spot and do all that, I think you just have to kind of embrace the fact that there's going to be differences in those beers. Cade may have a different.
Well, yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with Marshall, right? It depends on the question, what the purpose of your experiment is, right? Like, so I think that's one that kind of influences everything you do in terms of an experiment. So what's the purpose? If you're doing and just trying to say like, hey, we want to explore this variable, right? Like, let's say mash temperature, right? Like you just want to explore the mash temperature variable. So everybody's going to brew the same beer using the same ingredients to hit the same OG and, you know, the same FG and all that sort of stuff. But you're just kind of wanting to explore the variable. Maybe mash temperature matters in Kevin's equipment, but it doesn't matter in Marshall's equipment, right? Or Dan's equipment. So if you're just saying like, hey, let's explore the range of this variable, that's kind of a cool question that y'all can answer, right? Is say like, hey, well, in the brew in a bag, you know, the 4 or 5 guys have got the brew in a bag system. We noticed that mash temperature wasn't really that important, but the guy over here that's doing, you know, the 3 vessel system, it's super important because that vessel has to have that heat and you've got to hold that vessel at the right temperature. It's not doing like a recirc or something, you know, so that's kind of a cool thing that you guys would get to do that we don't necessarily get to do when we're publishing a Brulosophy experiment, right? Or even like a scientist that's doing it wouldn't be able to have like and explore that range. What happens when we just focus on one variable, you know, here, but we also sort of expand it out. So you've kind of got that. I mean, there's a limit to the conclusions you can draw there, right? Like you can't say like, oh, the mash temp 100%, you know, creates a different beer because you're looking at different equipment systems, right? So, you know, but if you're kind of like just, you know, like keeping that consistent, right? Keeping the equipment profiles consistent, you can explore the range of the variable, which I think is kind of cool. But back to Marshall's original point, if you're trying to say like, does mash temperature matter if you're not brewing those on the same equipment? It's pretty impossible to say that like, yeah, just because the beers were different, it was because of the variable, not because of the equipment. I mean, you can try to tweak things, but again, getting that equipment profile, because it's like, you know, how fast are you recirculating the pump? You know, what's the speed of the pump going? And that's not even something that you put into Brewfather, right? Like, or Beersmith or whatever equipment profile you're doing. So you've got all these little nuances. And like Marshall said, the water would have to be exactly the same. The mill would be exactly the same. You know, the gap on the mill measured down to the right micrometer. And, you know, so all that stuff, I mean, if you're taking that all the way through the process, it's going to be real hard to make sure that it's exactly equal. But again, if you're asking the question, maybe let's just explore this and see what it's like for our homebrew club. That's a pretty cool answer. I'd love to see that, you know, to see what that looks like.
Yeah. And I think there's, you know, it's weird because when we talk to people, we've been doing this for a while and talking to people who have questions about how to experiment in groups. And it's easy to kind of interpret what we're saying as perhaps being like, well, you can't really do it well. No, I think there's massive amounts of value in what we refer to as practical experimentation. I mean, you know, if I'm a home brewer, back before I started Brulosophy, I remember experimenting, which just meant I would take a recipe that I've made 5 times and use a different hop. Well, that's still valuable. There's still something to be learned there, even if it's subjective and I'm the only one learning it, you know, you're trying something new, and that is technically experimentation. So, you know, so I don't know how deep we want to get into like recommendations for experimentation, but we kind of view the experimentation component of brewing in 2 ways: as practical or comparative. And comparative is what we do, right? We have 2 beers brewed side by side. Everything is the same as we can make it, at least, right, Cade? And then we compare those, and we do a triangle test to have people compare that. But that is not the only way to, quote, experiment with beer. And I think what clubs out there are doing right now, and we've done it multiple times locally with homebrewers as well, and it's a lot of fun. You learn a lot, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
we've done experiments last year or comparisons last year. We've just done like a smash brew. So, you know, we're just picking different hops, you know, base malt and a hop, and we're doing that for flavor. We're not doing it to kind of work out a really minute, intricate variable. But then we've done other comparisons where we're doing something around water. So we might pick two opposite water profiles and done the same recipe. But if we're doing those on a different equipment, it's difficult to determine which is what you're tasting is down to equipment and what is down to the water different or the differences in the water. So yeah, I've obviously read or listened to the podcast a lot and read the website, and you see them, and you've got the exact setups side by side for all the experiments, and we know we could never do that or not get close to that. So it's interesting.
It's a pain in the butt.
I mean, it's a pain in the Andy's doing an experiment right now, which he's got like one beer that he's brewing to a higher gravity, and then he's going to dilute. That's going to come out here in a little bit. So. But he's doing an experiment, and it's tough, right? It's tough to like make sure that everything stays the same, and that the only difference is how much you're diluting that beer. I mean, it's like super tedious going all the way through. Or what was the one I talked about a while back? It was the Star San versus the iodophore, right? Using the different sanitizers, having to like make sure that like every gasket is sanitized in one and versus another one. Just like things that you wouldn't even think about if you're doing it yourself. But again, you're looking at your comparisons. If you're looking at an ingredient, I think that's a really cool one to do as on like people's different systems. Because then you can say like, wow, that Cascade, in Kevin's system was really, really grapefruity. But over when Dan did it, I got more like, piney notes to it. And so that's really interesting. So, you also learn a little bit about your own system, right? So like in that case, you can say like, yeah, I noticed that Kevin's beer was a lot more grapefruity. So maybe he's got something that he's doing. His water is better or something for like those fruity beers. But, Dan can make this really awesome, IPA that's going to be like not really bitter and have a lot of like really, piney hop character, like a Pliny the Elder or something like that, which is a popular beer over here on the West Coast. But yeah, you got all these options. So like, don't think about like limiting it just to like try to make it where you're just narrowing in on one focus. Yeah.
It's interesting actually, because when we did the hop comparison, it was one brewer, one hop. Whereas like you say, if we maybe paired up, then you could say, those two people did Galaxy, and then you explore, why they differed, because it could have been water, it could have been X, Y, Z, and it develops discussion, doesn't it?
We actually, that reminds me of a fun thing that we did over here. Same group of guys. We have a pretty close knit group of friends who all homebrew, and we brewed House of Pendragon, local place here in town, gave us their popular IPA recipe. And so we all brewed that, we went and bought our own hops. We did all that. And one of the guys' beer was like super orangey and clear and crisp. Other ones were kind of flabby. I think mine was kind of hazy. All of these things, because we were going off of the same exact process that Tommy uses at House of Pendragon. Well, lo and behold, the biggest difference that between all the five of us who brewed this was our water chemistry, because we all live in different parts of the town and our water is completely different. So mine, I didn't mess with, none of us, I think, adjusted our water for this. And so I've got this super soft water, very low bicarbonate, very low sulfate. And the buddy who made the one that we liked the most has this just horrible water for everything else other than brewing. Basically, it's like 350 TDS, and it ended up being the best beer. And we're like, what the hell made yours so much better when we all use the same ingredients, So it's just really interesting. But that's a perfect example of how, if we were just doing a hop comparison, his beer is going to taste different for way more reasons than just the hops that are being used there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. Great. I don't know if you on a time frame, Danny. You're going to push on to the next.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, let's open it up. Is anybody else? If you can come in, if anybody else has got any questions or.
I mean, I think that's the point that Marshall and Cade made about the equipment playing a part. I don't think we've ever really considered that in our comparison brews before. We've just thought, well, same recipe. People will adjust their efficiencies for their system or whatever, but I don't think we've ever really considered equipment profiles as playing a major part, which, it's quite interesting to learn that.
Sorry, Ben, go on.
I was going to say, we've always had a variable that we're looking at, haven't we? But maybe it might be interesting to all, like you were just saying, Marshall, all brew the same beer to the same recipe with the same ingredients, and then just try them all together and see, are they all the same? Are there differences? And then just have some open discussion around why that might be different. Is it equipment? Is it water profile? Did somebody do something different from the recipe? That might be an interesting one to do sometime, actually. Just not have a variable.
We did do that really early on.
Go ahead, Dave.
Maybe almost 5 years ago, I guess. It was one of the first ones one of the first ones we did, where we all brewed I think there were about 6 or 7 of us that did a dark mild. We got the ingredients all from the same shop, all in the same batch, etc., and just split it out. In fact, the shop did the split up for us, didn't they? And then we all brewed it on the different kit, and they were remarkably different, noticeably different.
And it's interesting too, like what Ben and Dave were saying. So Dave, y'all did this 5 years ago. I wonder, this is kind of one of those I might want to do every year, right? Like, and just see how things change. Like, as a brewer, are you changing every year, you know, or like how does it work? Or is your water profile changing, or who knows? Any of that? That'd be kind of fun to do annually.
My kit's definitely changed from 5 years ago.
Right?
Who's hasn't, right? I mean, God, that's like the downside of brewing is that you can't stop spending money to buy new stuff that you think is make your beer better. Yeah.
You mean you can't stop saving money on commercial beer? Sorry.
Which is all I'm drinking right now. Yeah.
I have a quick question. Is there a specific style of beer that you think would show off the differences between individual brewers compared to others?
Man, it really depends on what you're testing. I mean, this is something that we used to talk about a lot in the earlier days of Brulosophy about, well, let's just do blonde ale, Pilsner, you know, all of the mostly single malt, simply hopped, so that it allows if you're doing a high OG and you want to see if a roasted grain, you can't do that, right? I mean, you got to do Imperial Stout or something like that. So I think it really the way that we approach designing experiments is what's the variable, and then we go out from there. All right, what do we need to include to make sure that this variable is good? Okay, what does a recipe with that variable look like? And there are often times, if you go and you look at the recipes, where we've selected a BJCP style because it closely fits the recipe that we've done, but it's not spot on, right? It might be a low OG blonde ale that we just called an American blonde ale, but it's actually, you know, a little bit lower OG than it should be, or whatever it might be. We've done IPA that's lower OG with higher hopping rates to test dry hop stuff. So it's just kind of a matter of you know, the way I like to look at it is we tailor the recipe for the variable, not the other way around.
An interesting one to start off with might be like, what, I don't know, because if most of y'all are in, I have no idea how to say this word. Worcestershire.
It's like the sauce.
You can break it down just garble. You can just say Worcester.
Worcester. Okay, that's what I'm gonna do. All right, Worcester. All right. So that's so good.
Yeah, if you let him off far too easily.
Yeah.
I
might start saying fresh.
There's been a bit of a coal raking there.
Run it past us again.
Yeah, I don't know. Worcestershire, Worcester. All right, which Worcester? That's easier for me. I'm just gonna say Worcester. But like a water profile might be an interesting one. If y'all are all in Worcester, right, and the water there is like hard or something, you know, it may be good to start off with just a porter, right, or you know, an IPA, something that's got like a high sulfate, you know, or that you want like a really hard water going into. Maybe that's the best one to do. In Montana, Mark, I don't know what the water profiles are like in Montana, but who knows? I mean, maybe start there. Like, look at your water profile and see where if you can build something from there, just as like an intro.
Yeah, they're all over the place here.
Yeah. So in that case, maybe not.
Too. Yeah. That's here.
That's cool. Well, thanks, guys. I mean, just as I've only been homebrewing 3 years and joined the club 2 years ago, and I joined just as we were going into the first kind of lockdown in England and the pandemic, and I had a 7-month and a 2-year-old, and I literally listened to you guys for hours, walking them to sleep around the streets on my 1 hour exercise a day. So
yeah,
it's great talking to you guys. Thanks very much.
We're dads as well. We understand what you're going through. Trust me.
The pain.
Yeah, I've got a 3-year-old and another one on the way, due in March. So.
Oh wow! Congrats, mate. Congrats.
Pretty close. Pretty close.
Okay, cool. So Dave Cutler's going to kick us off with the next topic.
So yeah, the next sort of topic that we thought about was around tasting. So obviously you guys are known for the triangle test, or using the triangle test. But obviously if we're comparing a variable across multiple brewers, the triangle test is a bit of a challenge to use. And also we previously liked to meet up, obviously, and do the tasting and making those comparisons together. Obviously, it's been a little bit different now. We've been on Zoom for the last 2 years. It's actually brought about some opportunity. We've swapped bottles, so we've done the comparison thing. We've all brewed the beer, swapped a crate of beer, and then we've done the comparison on our own, sat like this on the screen. So it's all been a bit weird. But have you got any hints and tips for us regarding how to do the tasting and the comparing of the variable and the result?
Yeah, sure. You want me to start this one off, Marshall?
Go for it, bro.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do. On Zoom, it's kind of hard, right? I don't know. We've got Food Network here in the United States. I don't know if y'all got that on cable television there in the UK, but one of the things that they've been doing in COVID is like they have the judges that are judging these people's food, but like the judges are on Zoom. They don't even get to like try the food. It's just like the chef that talks about the food and says what's in it, and then the judges give them a score. So I don't really know how that works.
Yeah,
but that's okay, right? I mean, you can rely on the brewer, to tell you what they're tasting, right? One of the things that you can do to help that is by developing vocabulary. So if you've got if you look at the malt maps that say like, here's the top 5 malt flavors, or here's the top 5 hop flavors, develop that vocabulary. But then in like the nitty gritty of the testing, again, it depends on what you're wanting to test, right? If you're just wanting to say like, are these beers different? There's a bunch of different tests you can do from that. Like one of them would be just to say like, here's one beer, like here's a commercial example of a beer or whatever. And then you can line up the other beers and say, how different are these from this example, right? And then just line them in order and say like, this is the closest to this example, and this is the furthest away. And then you can sort of, just talk about what you taste and why you lined them up that way. And if, for example, you see in the homebrew club that, yeah, this one beer is way over here on this side, then you've understood like, wow, okay, this person, whoever they brewed this in this variable really matters for them because it's so different from the others. You can also just do what we call an A/B comparison, is just take 2 beers right next to each other, smell them and taste them, smell them and taste them, and then write down what you think is different about them, if anything, right? Or if they're the same. That's also a way to do it. And then you get into like more complicated tasting methods too. But you can also say like that sort of that same beer with the, say you've got 4 beers, you can say which one is sweeter. Okay, well, it's this one. Which one is more bitter than this one? Or if we have a variable like mash temp, you might expect things to be fruitier, right? Because of ester production. So you say which one smells fruitier than the others, and see if that variable see if it actually makes a difference. So there's kind of all over the place in terms of testing. But again, it depends on what your goal is.
Yeah, I like what Cade says. It depends on what your goal is. I mean, if your goal is to determine, the triangle test, the simplest way to describe what the triangle test fleshes out is that it's a distinguishability, sensory analysis distinguishability test. So can people tell apart beers based off of whatever weird difference we come up with in brewing those? And that's it. It has nothing to do with quality, beer quality. One of my least favorite things that we include in every experiment article is that stupid preference question, because preference is so incredibly subjective. If you were to take a gluten-free beer, I've never had one, Cade, but actually you've been drinking a lot of those lately, or a non-alcohol beer. I've yet to have one. Yeah, there you go. I've yet to have a non-alcoholic beer that I think is good. So if you were to do preference rating of the 20 people that are in this room right now, or whatever, half of us are going to fall below 50%. The other half will fall above. That's just the way it works,
Okay.
So if your entire purpose, which I don't see why a homebrew club would want to do this, is to determine if a small variable it makes a distinguishable difference, then you got to use something like a quadrangle or a triangle test. But if you just want to experiment to get some, a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more experience with specific brewing techniques or whatever it might be, then just do A/B comparisons and talk about it. Because that, with the understanding that each person's brewing setup and approach to brewing is likely having an impact on this, but who cares? We can still talk about, the differences that we're observing here.
I just thought of a good use for what Cade was talking about, where you have, your one beer and then your other beers that are next to it, as a good training tool for tasting to help develop your palate. And especially in a scenario like this, where you're on a Zoom meeting, so everybody's kind of independent, and have the beers set up in a way that everybody tastes them and then judges them independently. And then you get on it and go, okay, who had this one as this and this one as this, and then talk about how people taste things differently. And if you say you have 90% of the club saying, well, this one fits here, and you got a couple people saying, oh, wow, we tasted that over here. You know, it might be a good way for them to identify how their palates are a little bit different and help them to be able to judge how to judge beers, I guess.
Well,
yeah,
I'll tell
for
you,
sure.
yeah, if there's one of the more curious things, you know, I'm a psychologist. That's what I do for my day job. I love studying perception and how fickle human perception actually is. How many times have you served a beer to that one guy, maybe one of you are this guy, and I don't mean to hate on you, but who always picks out either diacetyl or DMS, right? There's always that
It's
guy.
Justin when you need him.
I know there's one in this group, but they always pick it out. And that's fine. There's no problem with that. But my question, whenever I hear that from somebody, and I just a couple months ago, this happened at a local brewery. I heard some douchebag down at the end of the bar saying there's diacetyl in every beer here. And I'm sitting there drinking it, you know, haven't been drinking for 25 years going, I don't get it. You know, I always ask, when was the last time you did a flavor standard? When was the last time you've actually tasted diacetyl? Or are you detecting what you've read about and you're just applying this presumed knowledge, this filter that you've built based off of what you've read or heard in podcasts, you know, and that's what you're applying. And now you think you're the expert on it. There's just so much fault in that. Go out as a homebrew club, pitch in some cash. They're not cheap, and get a flavor standard kit. I'm telling you, if there's anything that's going to help you to better describe, I think Cade and I agree on this one, if I'm not mistaken. DMS, it's always described as creamed corn. I don't know who invented that descriptor, but it does not taste or smell like creamed corn to me in the slightest. But prior to doing a flavor standard, that's what I thought it was, right? That's what I would look for. But now that I know, to me, it tastes like old ketchup. You guys have ketchup over there? Yeah, you the brown sauce. But yeah, to me, it tastes like old ketchup that's been sitting out overnight. You know, it's not a bad smell, but I don't want it in my beer. And I know that now. Prior to that experience, I've creamed corn. I've never smelled creamed corn in a beer. So I guess I'm just not sensitive to it, you know? So get a flavor standard kit. To me, that is, I mean, and then the ability not only to identify, but then describe it in the way that you perceive it. I think there's so much value in that.
Yeah, you know, there's something that's cool too that's easy to do for a club is to like go to the grocery store and tell people to pick up like certain things, like pick up some dried fruit, like some raisins, right? Pick up some dried fruit, pick up some chocolate, pick up some coffee, pick up some caramel, some toffee, and then pick up some like, you know, barley from your brewery or whatever, and put them in little cups and put them in front of you, and then just sit on the Zoom call and smell through each of them, right? Those are malt flavors. Chocolate, when we say chocolate, we mean chocolate, right? Like, so what does this dark chocolate smell like? Oh, that's what that's supposed to smell like. And then maybe take some roasted grain and smell the chocolate next to the roasted grain. And you've got, you know, suddenly now you're like, oh, that's chocolate. I know what chocolate is. Or, oh, toffee. Thus, I know what toffee is. Or nuts, you know, roasted salted nuts. When, you know, if scientists are doing, like actual brewing scientists are doing research in the lab, that's how they're training a panel, right? They're taking it and pouring, you know, orange juice in a little cup and saying, smell this. And this is what orange is, you know, smell this. This is guava, or this is biscuit. Biscuit's a good one. We need to do that one because biscuit has a different definition to you guys than it does to us. And cookie too, right? Cookie.
Same with chip. Yeah, same with chip.
Cracker, yeah. So
can you tell us what a graham cracker is?
Wait, hold on. I've got some. My son loves them. I'll be right back.
Well, he goes and do you know what a graham cracker is, or are you just pulling our chain over here?
No.
You don't know what a graham cracker is?
Just only from your podcast.
Yeah, that's the only time we've heard it.
So a graham cracker is it's like a sweet, crunchy but not hard cracker that growing up in America you dip it in milk.
Digestive, maybe.
It has a honey sweetness to it. A honey sweetness.
Yes, like a honey sweetness.
Yeah, honey. Oh, here, hold on. I got to turn that filter off because it's gonna like focus on that. But yeah, here. So this is a graham cracker. Have you ever had one of these?
No.
Maybe it's a bit like a digestive biscuit. I don't know.
Yeah, like a digestive biscuit. Yeah, it tastes a lot like a digestive biscuit. Yeah.
They're sweeter than a digestive biscuit, though.
But yeah, they're more like honey than a digestive biscuit. But they're like, have you ever had s'mores? Y'all haven't had s'mores? Like campfire s'mores?
Yeah, but we have to have them with digestives.
Yeah,
with digestives. Okay, I
soft,
see.
really, aren't they?
Yeah, so this is
they look quite hard, like a cracker.
They are like a cracker, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're sweet, huh?
They're
definitely
honey.
Sweet. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're good. Yeah,
they're really good.
Find some in your He's gonna eat some.
I always thought for those that are in England, I always thought they were like golden grains. I don't know why.
Yeah, they might be.
Well, golden grams the cereal, you mean?
Yeah,
that's what they modeled the golden grams after.
Okay.
It's just golden grams are thinner and yeah.
A little bit sweeter.
They're sweeter. They have more sugar on them than a graham cracker.
Yeah, they've got the coating, the sugar coating on the outside, but like the cracker itself inside of a golden graham, yeah, that's very graham cracker. Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you've had beers that taste like graham cracker. It is very common, especially English beers. I mean, that's how we describe a lot of the English malt character. Is it like, to me, Maris Otter is graham cracker. It's graham cracker.
No, Maris Otter's cheddar crackers for me, like Cheez-Its or toasted cheddar crackers.
What? Whatever, you're weird.
For goldfish, yeah. I'm not weird. This is a common one.
Cheddar cracker? Like better cheddars?
Yeah. Mm-hmm, yeah. Cheez-Its or goldfish or something. I don't know if y'all have those in the UK, but
goldfish.
But yeah, but see, this is a great example, right? So in the last like 2 minutes, y'all learned what a graham cracker is. You didn't get to taste it. Right. So you got to hear me describe it and hear what I taste about it. But so that's a perfect thing to do as a Zoom panel, and it'll improve your brewing practices, and it's doing different comparisons for that. You can even with hoppy, right? Think about different hop flavors. We talk about tropical hop flavors. We talk about fruity. We talk about vegetal. We talk about all this. You can find all these things at the grocery store to train on and smell. So
I guess just to add to that, what's been fascinating, certainly for me, the club's done a little bit of BJCP training, and we've trained ourselves basically. We've just grabbed a whole load of beers of a particular style, and we train ourselves. And what's absolutely fascinating is that even amongst just 6 people, going around 6 people, the amount of different descriptors that you get for potential. Well, it is the same beer. We're drinking out the same bowl, but all the different descriptors, and so the individualness of your detection of aromas and flavors is quite. For me, it's really surprising how different descriptors can come out from different people.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about beer evaluation is. I don't pat myself on the back too often, but I have this weird thing in my head where when I smell or taste something, I rely on nostalgia for my for the descriptor that I come up with. And so my descriptors are always really off the wall. And it's not to be quirky or anything. It's because that's what it reminded me of, and I want to get it out there before I lose it. And so I made a beer that had, have you guys heard of Kohatu hops? They're a New Zealand variety. Relatively old. They've been around for about a decade or so. And to me, I tasted it and it tasted like gummy worms. It had this gummy worm fruitiness when you open a bag of gummy worms. Well, you could generically call that fruity, or you could call it something that's even more identifiable to those of us who were raised in the 80s with gummy worms, So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think we'll bring in Ben now. So as we're talking about sort of tasting techniques, Ben, if you want to drop in on the next subject, and then we'll open up for a few questions.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I guess it kind of follows on from that last question from Dave. Really, we've as we described, we do quite a lot of comparison brews in the club, and in the before times, we used to meet up in pubs and try all those beers together. More recently over Zoom. But it's always been us tasting our own beers and comparing them ourselves. So just wondering what your thoughts were on getting members of the public or other non-home brewers to try the beers, whether they're beer fans or not beer fans, whether there's any value in that, people that are more independent from the experiment themselves, and what your thoughts on that would be.
So everybody has a palate. Just because you are more keen on beer, or you have more experience of evaluating and describing beer, doesn't necessarily mean that you have a quote better palate than another person. We all have the capacity to tell apart things that are different. You know, I may not like tomatoes very much, but I could taste two different tomatoes and tell you if one tastes different or not. Right. That's just the way sensory works. And so I love the idea of stepping outside of the people who brewed the beers, right? Because if you really want to do a good experiment, blindness is key. Well, who's more blind than people who have no idea what the hell you did, right? Yeah. And you don't tell them what you did up front. You just say, hey, compare these beers. Let me know what you think, whatever your, you know, evaluation survey or whatever it is. And you have them do that. And, you know, for the most part, we've talked about this quite a bit among Brulosophy. If you're serving them to people who like craft beer, well, that's your target audience, you know, whether they brew or not, or whether they're in the club or not. If they're willing to drink craft beer, well, then they're probably got a good enough palate to give you at least some data, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say, like, again, it sort of comes back to your purpose, right? Like, what are you trying to figure out? Are you trying to figure out that, you know, do consumers notice a difference in these two kinds of beers? If that's the case, then you want to go out to consumers, right? Like, but one thing I've been thinking about recently is my wife doesn't really like, she likes beer. Well, she's not drinking beer right now because she's pregnant, but she does like to drink beer, but she really likes sour beers. And so that was something that she wanted to explore. And so I was wondering, like, hey, if I started making sour beers, would people enjoy sour beers more? Right. So breweries all the time are trying to figure out, if I make a sour beer, are people going to buy it? You know, if you're interested in building a brewery at some point, you know, that's something you want to think about when you're developing your recipes. As a club, if you're just trying to say, like, who can make the best beer on this style, you know, then you don't necessarily need consumers to go and taste it. If you want to go out and have consumers taste your beer just to say, like, what does a normal beer drinker think about my beer? Yeah, why not? Right. I mean, any of those things can be done. It always just depends on, you know, what your purpose is. But, you know, Marshall was talking about, like, bias, and bias is a big one, especially if you're evaluating your own beer, right? Because we all brew the beers that we like to drink, right? I mean, if I've got 20 liters of beer over there, I want it to be 20 liters of beer that I can, you know, drink or at least share with my friends, and my friends like it. But so you can never really remove bias. And so even when I'm trying my own beers, there might be particular flavors in my beer that I don't know about. And so that's where I do like to go share the beer with a club member or with friends, or, you know, even non-beer drinkers. Just say, hey, you want to try something that I think you might like as a beer? You know, so that's okay, right? You've got all these different avenues for getting your beer to different people. If you're just doing comparisons and you want to know, like, if you want to be able to describe why the beer is different, then you may want to consider, like I said, talking through the club about, like, hey, here are the things that we're going to try to taste in these beers. And then we're going to talk about these discrete specific things. We're going to rate each beer on its fruitiness on a scale of 1 to 9. And then we're going to talk about it. We're going to rate one beer on the scale of its maltiness for 1 to 9. And then we're going to talk about it. You know, so those are also things that you can do, and you can use commercial examples for that, or you can use your own beer. And then once you're able to share with other people, talk about what they taste, because that's how I learned. I mean, I never felt, Marshall mentioned the cooked corn thing. I didn't really feel comfortable to like, whenever I was earlier, I didn't feel comfortable saying, like, this doesn't taste like creamed corn to me, or cooked corn. Like, this tastes like, I don't know what this tastes like. It just, I smell this thing, but what does it taste like? And it took me sort of like opening up my senses and going, all right, what does this taste like to me, to attach, you know, tomato paste? So ketchup, like Marshall said, the old ketchup or tomato paste, that's what DMS tastes like to me. Acetaldehyde is another great one. People talk all the time about green candies, right? These green apple candies. That is not what acetaldehyde tastes like to me. It tastes like raw pumpkin. It's like when you scoop the inside of a pumpkin. That's what acetaldehyde smells like to me. But I wouldn't know that unless I had actually tasted the compound for myself. So you've got all these sort of range, and it was kind of a long-winded say of saying, if you want to reduce bias, the best way is to understand what your bias is, I guess. Let me, like, distill that down, if I can distill. So by doing tastings, by trying commercial beers and talking with other people about them, if you can't meet in person and share homebrews, that's how you develop, you know, your vocabulary, develop your palate, develop your ability to describe what you're tasting. And I think that's what's really fun about doing experiments. But
do you think you guys obviously strive to have independence and non-biased tastings. Do you think there's any experiments where it's beneficial that the tasters know the variables? Is there any scenarios where that's because we find ourselves in that situation more often than not, that we know the variable? Is there any particular comparisons where that's an advantage, do you think?
Yeah, I wish Marshall had his audio right now, because he and I actually disagree on this a lot, right? Because it's the concept of, should you train your panel when you're testing it? Should you tell them, hey, we did this experiment, and so now we need to we want you to tell us whether or not you taste this, right? And so that's a really important thing. And so a lot of brewing scientists absolutely do that. So they'll absolutely say, here are the range of things that you should taste in these beers. Tell me if you taste these things, right? And that's really valuable. So like, for example, if you're doing, let's say you're looking at, what's the new product from Haas, Incognito, which is an aroma liquid, right? If you're comparing that versus using regular T90 pellets, you want to be able to say to your tasters, hey, in this one, I used Incognito. In this one, I used T90. And what you should smell, if you smell any difference, is this particular hop character, right? Or I want to know if this particular hop character smells the same between the two. So I might say for Citra, I want to smell, what's a good Citra descriptor? Tropical or fruity. And I want the tropical and fruity level to be the same. So I want a 9 on tropical and fruity when using Incognito, and I want a 9 on tropical and fruity when I'm using T90. So there is absolutely a reason for training a panel and telling them what they should expect to taste in terms of the experiment. And for you guys as a homebrew club, again, if you're trying to develop some lexicon, it's really good to say, here's what this variable should do. Who tastes this or who doesn't? Now, understand, by telling people that, you're introducing bias, right? But again, it's just a matter of what you're comfortable with as an experimenter and what you're trying to get out of the solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but you still do that, the experiment you described there, you'd probably still do that semi-blind, would you? So you wouldn't tell the tasters which was which, you'd just tell them what the differences were and what they might experience.
If I were doing it as like a scientist, if I were doing it as like part of my career, I would probably do a triangle test first without telling anyone, right? Just straight like Brulosophy does. And then if there's a difference, then I would want to know what the difference is. So then I would serve it to a panel, and I would probably do what we call check all that apply. And so this is CATA, C-A-T-A. If you've read any of the science papers or anything, you'll see this, but it's essentially, here's a list of 16 attributes, check whether or not that attribute is present. So here's fruity, grassy, tropical, melon, DMS, acetaldehyde, all these things. Check if you smell this in the beer, right? And then we do some statistical analyses to look at the number of times that things are checked. And that helps us actually articulate what the difference is between those two beers. So say for the Incognito and the T90, we just did a triangle test and we didn't tell them anything about it. The only thing we know there is they're different. We don't know which one people prefer. We don't know why they're different. We don't know what's contributing to the difference. All we know is that they're different. So then, I would take it a step further and start to say, well, Ben, what did you taste? Dan, what did you taste? Kev, what did you taste? John, what did you taste? Because I can see his name down there. But and then that would help you, right? That would help you understand what the difference is between the two beers.
But I think what's interesting in the scenario you described there was in the Incognito versus T90, you're saying we've introduced this variable, but actually we want it to be the same. Like, that's a very different experiment to what is the difference. You're going, we don't want a difference, but if you can let us know if there is one, we might have. It's about balancing those two ingredients, isn't it? It's very different.
Yeah, it's exactly. So that's why I say, like, the first test would just be whether there is a difference, right? See if there is a difference in these two beers. And then, it gets into the whole thing. I've talked with the guys of Bart Haas about developing Incognito, and they go through like hundreds of different iterations, like how much of the Incognito is the same. And so actually I did a Brew Lab episode on this, I think, with what was his name? Marshall and Cade. He was looking at these, and so they were trying to figure out how to decide how much Incognito to put in. And you can actually measure. So if you measure just like the total hop oils that are going into the solution from the Incognito, that's actually a bad example. So same amount of oils in T90 versus the same amount of oils in Incognito actually resulted in different beers. But if you break it down and sort of look, well, Citra has, 47% myrcene as an example. And in the Incognito, I get that myrcene up to 80%. But in the T90, the myrcene is at, that same 40%. So I've doubled the amount of myrcene by adding it into the Incognito. So they've had to do this for like each one of their hop varieties and sort of assess what is the actual composition of the oil, not just looking at the total oil itself. That makes sense?
Yeah.
But anyway, those are iterations. So they've done hundreds of those trials where they're looking at like how best to dose that. But not like something that you guys would do at the Homebrew Club, but maybe, right?
Maybe one day.
Let me know if you guys can hear me.
Yeah.
All right, I'm back. I don't know what happened there. That was super weird.
Okay, cool. You can hear us okay, Marshall, yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you guys fine now. Yeah, sorry
Awesome,
about that.
great.
Jeez.
Excellent.
So we were talking about training versus untraining panels. I mentioned that I was wishing you were talking. What's your thought on train versus untrained? I gave my thoughts. That there's reasons for training versus like, doing it totally blind. But
well, yeah, I think they serve two different purposes, right? If you're collecting data from a trained panel, which first off, find me a whole group of trained tasters who want to all fly to Fresno or Oregon to participate in an experiment. But also, the purpose, if you're serving beers to a trained panel of tasters, then you are negating reality for specificity. You're minimizing real world application for a very specific small subsect of an already smaller segment of a population. And so I think it's valuable if that's what you want to do and you want to, but people like to think that they're the best taster on earth, but the reality is we all have about pretty equal skills when it comes to tasting things and describing them. And so for what we do, I definitely prefer your regular beer drinker, home brewers and beer drinkers and such.
It's interesting because as a club, we've never really sort of explored that, but maybe it'd be an interesting thing for us to do. We typically meet in pubs or in breweries where they've got a tap room, etc. So it'd be quite interesting for us to sort of go out to the punters, as we call them, the guys in the guys in the pub to taste our beers and sort of just describe specifically where we're looking at variables and sort of like trying to gauge their sort of levels. It's really interesting, Cade, and again that's something that we could probably bring into our comparison brew, is where we bring in scales as well, the sort of the levels that we're detecting. So yeah, I'm pretty sure we could bring a few of those points into what we do.
So it was funny what Marshall was saying there about trains. Everyone's got the same level of training when it comes to their taste, because we did a competition last year where there was one of the judges was notorious for picking out off flavors, and no one else ever got them, and it almost discredits his judging because he's always got to have that final say of I have found something bad though. Like no one else found it, just him.
Yep. Oh, we all know those people. We all know those people. Well, the other thing is, just because somebody was able to take have you guys, has anybody a BJCP judge here? Have you guys done the exam or anything?
Yeah, there's a few of us there. Yeah.
I hate to believe. Gordon is a friend of mine. Gordon Strong, nice guy. It is about as subjective of an evaluation as you take. If you're good at memorizing things or taking tests, you'll pass the online exam. You just have to know what styles are, and then you go into the tasting exam, and you better just hope that you match whatever the proctor thinks of that beer, because that's how you score. And that's just the nature of the BJCP exam. I'm a certified BJCP judge who never judges anymore, because to me, I think if we embrace the subjectivity of it, it would be a lot more fun. But there's this presumption that no, it's objective, and that these BJCP judges are better at tasting, which we've shown, they have their rates of getting our triangle test correct are no better than Tim, who drinks Miller Lite all day long. You know, people have the same ability to distinguish differences, even if their ability to describe what they're tasting is different.
That's the key, right? In my opinion, it's the ability to describe what they're tasting, right? It's the ability, because like Marshall said, if you're taking 2 tomatoes, right? I'm not particularly a fan of tomatoes either, but I could probably tell the difference between the way that they taste. I can't tell you why they taste different. All I can do is tell you that they taste different. And so that's where I think developing your vocabulary and tasting different beers, and the more beer you drink, the better you get at determining differences between beers and describing it. That's what's important. And that's what, for me, BJCP judge and Cicerone, that's always the thing that I try to do whenever I'm judging beers, is describe just describe what I think I'm tasting, like give you the best description that I can of what I'm tasting. Right. And then if you're getting judged, styles are out there for a reason. Some people love them, some people hate them. But if you're trying to make a porter and you're submitting it into a competition, we have to have boundaries in order to judge a beer. So I don't want to get too far off into the style, whether we should do styles or not. But
the weeds.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was really interesting.
Go ahead.
Really interesting. I think it was the previous question, Cade, you were saying about getting a bowl of raisins and chocolate and just smelling that, and that's a really good idea and thing to do, because we're using all these descriptors all the time when we're tasting and smelling beer. But when was the last time you stuck your nose in a bowl of raisins or graham crackers or roasted nuts and really experience that in its purest form? I picked that up from tonight actually, and be a good idea to do that. I think a bit more and develop that those descriptors.
Don't forget sulfur and
light struck. Make sure you do light struck too.
Skunkiness is another one that's difficult for us.
Right, yeah, because you don't have skunks, right? There's no skunks in the UK. Yeah.
Don't worry, just eat burritos and then hang out, and that'll be like the last thing that you do.
No, it's actually a funny story about that. So on both of my BJCP exams and my Cicerone exam, there was a skunky beer. And I got it wrong both times. Apparently, I'm totally insensitive to sulfur. So I was like, one guy put a beer out on his patio, just it was a Corona, in a clear Corona bottle on his patio for 2 weeks, and just had it exposed to sun. And apparently everyone else couldn't even like sit in the room. And I was like, hey, this tastes like a great Corona.
Oh, and that skunking effect, it literally takes 5 seconds. It happens. Yeah. When I go out to a pub and I see, it's great to be able to sit outside, catch a breeze, whatever. And I see these people and the sun is just nailing on their beer. I like, in my head, I'm like, I don't know how they can even drink that. I'm so sensitive to it.
So do you take a little umbrella? I'm
the weirdo who holds it right up against my body and kind of bends over. Yeah.
We don't really get any sun, so it's not really a problem over here.
Right. Exactly. There was another one I was going to say that's more specific to England. If I think of it, I'll say it.
No worries. So again, anybody else got any questions about tasting techniques, or certainly as a club and what we've been doing as a club? Sort of any other thoughts?
I think Pete had his hand up, but he's on mute.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Okay.
Pete. Yeah. So.
Just unmute yourself, Pete.
No, I had a question that wasn't related to tasting techniques, so I'll shut up for a bit.
Okay, we'll have a bit of time.
Stop making so much noise, Pete.
I will say, if we're going to finish talking about tasting stuff, it's so easy for us. And, appeal to authority, it's very strong. You hear John Palmer, friend of ours, you hear Gordon Strong, all of these people, we're all friends. They all agree with this, that you can't just take on authority what they describe, that you have to taste it for yourself and come to an idea of what these things, how you experience them. And that will be the only way that you can ever, with any amount of certainty, that you can ever truly be able to say, this is what I'm pretty sure I'm getting here. And even then, you may be wrong. And that's the reality of it. One of the things that drives me crazy is when I used to compete and I would get back a score sheet and they're like, mash longer, too sweet, FG probably too high. This thing would be 1009 FG mashed for 90 minutes. It's like you are making so many presumptions as a judge. That is not how you effectively and properly judge a beer. You don't give, arrogant advice or whatever, which is largely unsolicited. That's not what judging is about. No, when I would judge, I might write something like, perceptibly sweet to my palate. So it's subjective. It's to me, curious if maybe you use too much crystal malt. If not, consider this, right? So now it's like, okay, this is kind of my little version of, if this is what you did, then this, not prescriptive. You need to change this part of your process, even though I don't even know how they brewed the beer, right? You got to taste these things for yourself to know what they really taste like or smell like even.
That's the really difficult thing when you're judging, because you have no idea how they brewed that beer. So you're always having to guess. And I think you can only do it by wrapping it up in those in that way to say, if it's, I'm tasting this, or I'm perceiving this, and if you did it this way, then I could think that maybe that, something different would help.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's the thing is there is I don't know if it's a personality thing. I don't know if it's, what drives a person to want to sound like they know everything. I don't have that bug. I'm perfectly fine being wrong, but I also have no interest in convincing other people to be like me. That does nothing for me. Right. But there are people out there who it's like, if I can convince this person that I'm right, it validates who I am. Right. That to me is one of the worst ways to approach evaluating beer in general, because there's too much presumption involved in that it becomes almost, I don't know, it feels like a reality TV show where you're like, this isn't real, but they're trying to spin it as being true, and you can't be, because it's just one person's opinion. Right. So I don't know. That's the way I like to approach it, is to be really subjective about it. And be kind. I mean, somebody invested the time and the energy into making this beer. Just be fucking kind to them. You don't have to tear them apart to make yourself feel better,
But there's also that saying that perception is reality, and like you say, it's not about your perception is the reality for your tasting, but like you say, it's about offering those different. I perceive this. It could be A or B. It could be one or the other. I'm not saying
exactly.
I've perceived it sweet, so you should do this, because your perception might be different to the guy next to you.
I have a theory that you will see a rapid rise in people interested in judging if we start to move more towards a subjective approach, as opposed to this, it's almost like elitist, like, oh, how high up in the judging are you? You must be better than, right? No, you've just invested more time in it. That's really what it is. Maybe that makes you better. Who knows? But if we move more towards a subjective approach, I think you'll find a lot more people wanting to compete and wanting to judge.
Cool.
Just a theory.
Yeah. Cheers, guys. Cheers. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next topic and bring Craig in for the next one.
Hi guys. So when we're thinking about our collaboration brews, we kind of try to limit the amount of variables as much as we can. We all, as we've said, we all use different equipment, and that's going to bring a lot of variability into it anyway. But are there any sort of standard methods that we might be able to use in order to help reduce the variation that we get, and to help us draw more meaningful conclusions in some of our experiments?
Are you talking about the having multiple people brew batches for the experimental thing?
Yeah, so we each kind of agree on what it is that we want to try and figure out, whether it be hops, malt, or whatever else, and then we each go off and kind of either pair up or just trying to find out, even if it's the same recipe maybe, and then just trying to figure out how we compare those.
Yeah, I don't know, Cade, do you have any ideas? For me, I get hung up on if you're brewing on different equipment right there, that for what we do, at least Brulosophy, that for a comparative experiment, you still should compare the beers and talk about them and learn something, but it'd be hard to isolate a variable in that instance.
Yeah, I guess to me, maybe one of the things, I guess I've been talking about it a lot today. I didn't intend to do this, but it's like developing that language, right? If you guys can agree on some descriptors, or if you can agree on some things that you should or shouldn't taste, or that you might taste, even before you do the experiment, that may be an opportunity to sort of narrow the results or be able to analyze the beers in a more like, narrow focus. I mean, obviously understanding that's going to introduce some bias into the experiment itself, but if you're just doing it for exploratory purposes, that could be something that's helpful.
Yeah.
And gents, I got about my wife is on the way here. She's hungry, and so any of you that are fathers and have a pregnant spouse, you know what that means. But I got a few more minutes.
Okay. So let's move. We are pushing time quite a bit. I said to the guys an hour, so let's crack on. So Gareth, do you want to come in and ask the final topic?
Yeah, sure. So last question then. Just so with all that we've done so far, we've got our results, we've got the data from our experiment. How can we then use that to help improve our brewing?
Ooh, I'm gonna crack this one first here, Cade. It depends on what you mean by improve. We get this question all the time. What can we do to make better beer? Well, first off, better beer, again, I've said this word a ton, is subjective. What's good to Craig may not be as good to Ben. What's good to Dom, it has to be what you like. And you are home brewing because you're brewing what you want to drink. And now if you're brewing for other people, like a commercial brewer, then by all means, run some tests, see what people like to drink. Usually that's based on sales, so you keep doing what sells the best. But, to me, if I'm experimenting with stuff, and you could say this about Brulosophy in general, I think that a big part of the influence that we've had, unbeknownst to us or unintentional, I should say, is the fact that people have eased up on their brew days. They've made their brew day easier. So the experience has been improved. Has it improved their beer? I think most people would contend their beer is equally as good as when they were being more anal about their brewing process, but maybe they're mashing for 30 minutes and boiling for 30 minutes and they're fermenting lagers warmer. And, if that floats your boat and you like the beer in the end, then I would contend that you've improved your brewing experience, which is perhaps even more important than making better beer, because you can make, to me, a beer, good water, good recipe, and sanitation, good sanitation, and you're going to make a good beer. You make a drinkable beer. Then it's tweaking recipes, tweaking your water profile, doing things like that. You can use, even if brew in a bag makes a different beer than fly sparge or than batch sparge, that's fine. You can tweak that recipe to the point, as long as you have good process, good sanitation, good recipe, you can tweak it so that it becomes something that you absolutely love. Whether you enjoy brewing it or not is probably more important than the outcome, in my opinion, because if you don't enjoy brewing it, you're not going to want to go back and do it again, So that's kind of where my focus is at. Cade may have more, a less sentimental perspective.
Well, I don't know. Mine may be a little bit more sentimental too. Like, it's just that remember that by doing an experiment, you're improving your brewing, right? I mean, just by being present and doing the experiment and looking at these different variables means you had to do something you're analyzing your own process or whatever, so I think that's super important, and don't lose sight of that. Right? Any experiment that you're doing improves your brewing practices, because it's going to give you some information that you're going to use for the future. Right? And okay, I don't want to do this thing, or yeah, I do want to do this thing, or whatever. So don't lose sight of that fact. I mean, any experiments are useful information. And with that, I do have to jet. Fellas, so
yeah, nice one,
buddy.
Cade. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, guys. Happy birthday again.
Cheers.
Later, buddy.
As well.
Bye.
Okay.
Don't worry. I'm better than Cade. You've got me for about 10 more minutes. That's usually not the case. He's usually always more active and stuff like this than I am. But the one thing I wanted to say on that as well is that, so I've been brewing for 19 years now. I brewed my first batch 19 years ago this month. I've been drinking beer for almost as long. I have probably had 10,000 plus different homebrewed beers. I've had, just for Jersey/Justin and Tim beer reviews on the podcast, we've had over 200 beers submitted that have been reviewed. Some of them have tasted like shit. Some of them were awful, but my experience trying them was always fun. It was always exciting. And I feel like people far too often combine those two things, right? Is if it tastes bad, then my experience is bad. But I love trying new things. I'm not a big fan of hazy IPA. I'm not a big fan of dessert stout. But you better believe if one of you guys were to send me one, I would sit there and I would enjoy it, even if it tasted like crap. And I don't know how to explain that. It's there's an approach to trying something new, I guess, or to trying these things that I guess maybe it's not shared with a lot of other people, but I enjoy trying it. And that's the part that I look forward to. Not necessarily whether I think it's a world-class beer, but the fact that I'm trying something that somebody else created. That to me is what's most important. And I know that that's an uncommon, perspective, but
it's a bit of self-learning, isn't it, Marshall? I guess it's even if you're tasting a beer that is you're not particularly enjoying, it's a bit of self-learning to say, well, why am I not enjoying this beer? What flavors am I getting that I don't particularly enjoy? And
and the other part is, how come I can sit here and say that I don't like it, and yet you've got a whole table of people over here who absolutely love it?
Yeah.
Who's more right? And that's the one thing, one of the many things that I sit and I scratch my head about is I've got friends, great friends, I jump in front of a train for them. Not really, but, who will say this beer is awful. It sucks. They should take it off the tap. And meanwhile, you've got, a table of 15 people who are just scarfing this stuff down. Well, obviously it doesn't make you right or wrong. You don't like it, but for you to speak so objectively about something that other people enjoy, and that's kind of where we're at with Brulosophy is like, if we do an experiment, people are presuming that we're saying, all right, cool, you don't have to worry about this. We've never said that, not a once, but what we're doing is we're exploring these variables that we've always been curious about, and we're compiling data slowly but surely. And now you can go back and you can look at, 8 mash temperature experiments, and then you can decide for yourself, well, what does mash temperature really do based on the data that's here, not on the opinion that's being shared, right? And that's kind of the key. That's the way I view a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of us are parents, and I'll say to my kid, try this, and she goes, I don't like it. And I said, well, I've never seen you try it.
Yeah, exactly. Try it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So what we got there, Marshall? About 5 minutes left, maybe, just for
that'd be perfect. Yeah, I got to get my son to his basketball game today.
No worries. So 5 minutes with Marshall. Then, any questions? I haven't asked the question tonight yet, so I'm going to kick off with a question.
And by the way, I'd say you got about 10 minutes, really. Don't rush it.
Okay, cool. 10 minutes.
Don't tell him that; he'll take it.
So my question, Marshall, is a bit tongue-in-cheek. How's Jersey getting on in his new location? Has he opened his bar yet?
He has not opened his bar. He just sent me a photo. He was supposed to be here this weekend, and plans got changed, unfortunately. But he just sent me a photo of some Brulosophy fan reached out to him and went to his house and brought him beers and stuff. And
excellent.
I mean, now he's probably his new best friend, because that's how Jersey is. But I think he's doing good. Jersey is a unique character, and that's one of the reasons we all loved him so much. And he's down in Oklahoma now. I don't know if you guys know about geographics in the US, but Oklahoma is the South. People have accents down there, and stuff like that. And so he's living life down there, and their house, I mean, from photos that I've seen, are beautiful. My wife and I have been talking about, once all the COVID crap passes us, and getting down there and visiting them. So, but I think he's doing great, by the sounds of it. So
excellent. Right, guys, over to you guys. Any open questions now? A bit of an open forum. So
can I ask a question and make a comment, Dan?
Go for it, Mike. Yeah.
Okay, so the comment, Marshall, is what you talk about a lot about bias and confirmation bias and so on, which is massive, I think. And I had a friend years ago who worked for a brewery. She didn't drink beer, so she was totally objective about it. And they did loads of tasting panels of members of the public. And at the time, there was a beer called Soul Beer, which was the big beer of the time. People drank it out of the bottle. People had always in the UK drunk beer out of glasses, and it was a big thing, and it was the best beer in the world. And she said on blind tastings, everybody spat it out and said it was disgusting. because they didn't know it was Sol beer. So it just comes back to your point, and I've never lost that since she said it, in terms of whether it's food or drink or whatever. It's this bias and confirmation bias which you talk about. So yeah, it's massive. And I always find that very interesting when you talk about it. And then the question is, obviously you talk a lot about your tasting beers, which interestingly, given how much I really kind of love you guys and what you do, your tasting beer is totally different to mine. You've been to Ireland, you've tasted stouts and so on and talked about those. What is your favorite English beer or beer style?
Oh man, I feel like I'm gonna come across like a complete dweeb here. In Minnesota, there is this British beer bar, and they get casks, delivered, distributed to them direct from Fuller's, and they had 4 Fuller's beers on cask. And I know that that's like a big beer over there. It's popular. It's easy to get your hands on, whatever. The special bitter, that's just a classic bitter that is so good. And it not only is it one of my favorite English beers, it's like top 10 of my favorite beers of all time that I can just drink all the time. It's so good. It's so good. I love Smithwick's, which is, I know, Irish, right? But I love that. I mean, that's the thing, is I'm kind of open to everything. I usually drink. Do you guys even have Miller Lite out there?
Yeah.
But that's like my go-to daily beer.
If you like Fuller's ESB, you must try Fuller's 1864.
Oh, I love it so much. I love it. I've had it.
Yeah. And you can culture the yeast from
off the bottom of the bottle. Yeah.
I
know people who've done it. Your story about your friend who did the soul tasting reminds me, if you go way back in our archives, like 7 or 8 years ago, one of the very first person who was contributing to Brulosophy after I started it, his name is Greg Foster. He got back in the day, he lives in California as well. And Russian River Brewing, I'm sure you've all heard of Pliny the Elder. Very popular beer. It's now distributed mostly in California, but it used to be just Santa Rosa. So like 300 miles from here. And I don't know how many kilometers that is, whatever, but so Greg, who lives in Southern California, got his hands on a whole box of this stuff. And he had an idea for an experiment that we wrote up where he bagged all of them so you couldn't tell what it was, and he just left them out at a homebrew club meeting. And then as people were drinking it, he was like, yeah, I brewed that beer, just let me know what you think. And they were like, oh, it was like mediocre ratings, like it's kind of hoppy, a little boring, whatever. And then he took the other half of the box, and there were the bottles of Pliny the Elder, and he set those out and just had people rate those. And they're like, it's top 10, one of the best beers ever. And it was at the end that he revealed, you guys literally rated the same exact beer differently. Bias is so incredibly strong, right? We know we are supposed to expect Pliny the Elder to be the best double IPA that we've ever had. And that's how we perceive it. And we're all victim to it. There's nothing bad about that, right? I've been in situations where people serve me a beer and don't tell me what it is. And I'm like, God, this is wonderful. And my buddy at Kronwolf's like, yeah, that's fermented with Kvike yeast. It's a hazy IPA, and I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to like this. I'm the non-hazy guy, but that's just what happens, and that's just part of the human condition. So
it's a saying of mine now in life, generally, is life is not a double-blind taste test.
That's right. Yeah.
If you like it, you like it. Don't worry.
That's right. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. Who cares?
Yeah.
And maybe tomorrow you will like it. That's what I tell myself. I'll try it again 500 times.
Yeah, that's interesting. The next day or different days, you like things differently. Yeah, you taste things differently.
There's actually there's been research that shows that the music that's playing in the background affects the way that you perceive beer, but also other sensory things, food and stuff like that. And you put on some heavy metal loud music in the background, and people tend to want more bitter beer. It's a weird phenomenon.
Well, it's the same with smell and taste and mood and sunlight and rain. They can all make you taste slightly different, can't they?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Any more questions for Marshall before he shoots?
Don't be shy.
What's
I know I've spoken a lot, so I'll let someone else. But if no one else has got a question, I will.
I think
somebody asked something about what's your next, and then it cut off.
What's next for Brulosophy? Anything different, or are you continuing on the same vein, or?
Well, right now, so I have a regular life where I work a normal 40-hour-a-week job. I'm a psychologist in a prison. And so outside of that, I manage 2 podcasts and a website that has 2 articles per week. So for me, if we add anything else onto that, besides my wife wondering what the hell is going on, it would have to be somebody else taking over, some of the management roles. So at this point, it's just maintaining. And to be honest, I've been shocked with the reception that we've received over the last 8 years with Brulosophy and how big this thing has gotten. It's wild to me, and the friends that we've made and the connections that we have and such. So I'm kind of cool kind of maintaining where we're at right now. And that's kind of the focus. So, until we get past this whole COVID stuff, that's kind of what we want. There've been parts of the industry, at least here in the US, that have seen some pretty crappy responses to the COVID thing. They're losing business and all of that. And yet the home brewing thing still seems to be doing pretty good. So we're just kind of, pleased with that at this point.
Well, I think it's great. You're doing a lot of really great work. It's, a very simple, on the face of it, a very simple idea. Take something that's a question to the brewing community and evaluate whether it really has an impact. So I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny. We have a Brulosophy based club that I am not involved with. It's actually was started by fans of Brulosophy called the Brew Club. You guys can all be members and still be a part of the Worcester Club, I promise. But one of the things is if you do your own experiment, you can have it published on the website. And every single time without fail, I get an email from the person who's like, I cannot believe how painful that was. That sucked so bad. Like, this is what we do every single week, 2 batches side by side, being nutty about it. And it's just kind of fun for other people to experience that.
I was going to say, actually, Marshall, do you want to talk a little bit about the Brew Club and what that's all about? Because like you say,
sure.
All of us could get involved with that, couldn't we?
Absolutely. And the truth of the matter is that was kind of the idea that the guys who started it have, is they didn't want to pull anybody from their local club, because that is such an important thing, that community that you have locally. But the idea was, let's create a place where anybody, or any club for that matter, can come who have a shared interest in the kind of more experimental, data-driven side of brewing. And so we started it. It was initially started by a group of guys about 2.5, 3 years ago. COVID hit, it kind of fell off. And then a group of about 6 dudes got together and were really committed to making it something. And over the last 1.5 months, 2 months, they've really, I've been shocked with what they're doing. They've got a whole lineup over the next year of great guests for their monthly club meetings, which are all virtual. Everybody's invited to go. All you have to, it's free right now. What they're planning on doing, what the latest word that I got was that they're going to always keep it free, but that if you want to qualify for certain benefits, then you can pay like $5 a month or something like that for it. But they've got all kinds of cool stuff planned. Right now they're doing I forget what they're calling it, but it's like a group brew where they got Laulemund, so Lau Brew, to send out yeast to like 50 of the club members, and they went like that. And they're all brewing the same exact beer, kind of like we were talking about. And then they're going to get together on a Zoom and talk about their beers and stuff. It's really cool. And the idea is to encourage people to try new things, to think more open-mindedly about brewing in general, and not to get stuck in that rut of, appealing to authority, all of the bias stuff that we've been talking about, and just having fun with it. So I'm really proud of those guys. They're doing a good job.
Awesome. Cool. Any other questions? Kev, did you want to?
Have you got time for one more, Marshall?
I've got more. Yeah, we're good. We're good.
And I guess this is probably a question you've been asked 1,000 times, but what of the experiments that you've done or comparisons has shocked you the most?
Like 1,000,000 times, actually. the ones that have got me the most. So the way that I've got kind of a like locked and loaded version of my response for this, but it's very honest. The one where I was like, there's going to be no way this has an impact, and it did, was water chemistry. I was the guy who was completely convinced of what you read in How to Brew and all those books, that if you have good enough water, you're going to make good beer. Little did I know that just, half an ounce or 14 grams of gypsum added to an IPA makes a distinguishable, consistently perceptible difference. That blew my mind. And it completely changed the way I brew. Every beer that I brew now, I mind my water every time. The one that I think where I presumed there would be a huge impact, and has been none, at least for certain yeast strains, is the lager fermentation temperature stuff. To this day, I still ferment all of my lagers warmer. People ask, well, there's been a few that have come back significant. So those are certain yeast strains, and we've kind of parsed them out. Like all the ones that come back significant are from the Sods family of yeast. The ones that don't are from the Froberg or whatever it is. And the funny thing is, if you look, my favorite yeast is it's the Augustiner strain, and Imperial Yeast sells it as L17 Harvest. And that one came back significant, fermented at 50 versus, which is 10C versus 66, which is 19C. Everybody in the experiment that we did, not everybody, but a good proportion of the people who tasted it and who got it right preferred the warm fermented one because they thought it was cleaner and tasted more lager-like. So figure that one out for me, because I can't figure it out. And we've done this multiple times where we're going, all right, you had for decades, centuries probably, highfalutin brewing names saying you got to ferment lagers cold or it's going to be too estery. And yet the warm fermented ones are cleaner, meaning not as estery, right? Easier to drink, crisper, clearer. It just, to me, I'm like, okay, that's crazy. And so that, and it's the one that we get the most shit for, without question. And we've done more lager fermentation experiments than I think any other single variable.
And I've followed a few of your the recommendations, or through do the ramp up or just doing it warm. I've tried a few of those.
Yeah. What'd you think?
Well, I've done it with the 3470, so the side of Staff Lager 3470, and done that 1920, and not had any perceivable difference to then using another lager strain at 10 degrees, for sure.
I think it's cool. I was absolutely convinced it was going to be awful, but yeah.
I'd say the same about the short and shoddy stuff that you do. I've been brewing for 4 years, and obviously been into the podcast, and I've developed my brewing with it. But I've tried quite a few of the short and shoddy, and that's amazed me at how little difference it makes for these things that are like ingrained, that you must mash for at least 60 minutes, and you must do this, and you try mixing it up, and it doesn't. There's definitely shortcuts that you can take without making much, if any, difference to the beer that you're producing. I found that fascinating from your podcast over the years.
Yeah, me too. The original short and shoddy batch that I brewed was an absolute joke to make my friends make fun of me. That beer ended up being so good. It was a 2-gallon batch or whatever of just old, like 3-year-old grains that I found at the bottom of my shelf, and it ended up being good. And it's like, can you imagine what the brewing world would be like today had the people thousands of years ago not determined that you have to mash for 60 minutes, which, how ambiguous is that anyways? How convenient that 60 minutes just happens to line up with an hour, I mean, it just, like, there's parts of it where you're like, it doesn't really make much sense that we settled on these numbers, but it's convenient.
It's useful in a way, actually, because there's so many variables to brewing, and so many ideas that you have to do it this way or that way. And Brulosophy has kind of become like a haven for, well, not really,
Jersey made a meme a while back that had it was the yellow background with the dude holding the glass, and it says, I forget exactly what it said, but it said, "Oh, you think you have to do this to brew good beer? Hold my glass." We never intended for us to become that, but apparently that is. I mean, we have a pretty big magazine over here called Popular Mechanics. I believe that's what it was. Like 6 years ago, they did an article on us, called us the Mythbusters of brewing. We never intended for that to happen, but that's the way we get viewed, and we could fight it all we want. We're not going to change that. So.
But I think what's interesting is you don't apply a business model to your podcast. It's fun. It's friends experimenting. You're not trying to make a business out of it. So whether it's result A or result B makes no difference to your everyday life. It's having fun, isn't it?
That's it. And that was what it started as, is having fun. And the fact, now it is a business and I get that. And we generate revenue and we have a whole payroll and all that stuff. But you know what? The fact that we're able to turn something fun into something that generates some income, that's pretty cool to me, and we're not swindling people. We're not trying to convince people to think a certain way. So I'm okay with that.
I think that's the thing with the experiments is that, you can read it, you can see what the results are, etc. But the main thing is try it for yourself. Try that variable for yourself and see how you perceive it in your beers. It's good to take that on.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
All
Any
right.
more questions before? Yeah. Any more before Marshall shoots?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you guys for letting me join your group here. I really enjoyed it. And,
It's good. It's good to have you here, Mark.
Hopefully, last time I was in England was nearly 40 years ago. So I don't know if I'll
You
get
look
there.
a day
again.
older than 32, Mark.
Huh?
So you don't look a day older than 32.
I'm not. But if I ever get over there, hopefully I can get a hold of one of you guys and we can go hang out a little bit, and vice versa. If any of you guys ever come to the States and are going to Glacier Park or Yellowstone Park or any of the famous things here in Montana, happily give me a call or text or on this or whatever, and happily show you around.
Awesome.
How much
Cheers,
beer
Mark.
is in the kitty, Dan?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Let's wrap it up then. Let's thank Marshall for his time. We thanked Cade earlier. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for joining us, Marshall. Really appreciate it.
I want to thank you guys so much for having us. This has been, I've done so many of these during COVID, and this has been easily one of the most interactive and fun. I don't say that every time, I promise. but for real, we are definitely planning on making a trip out to London in the next few years, my wife and me. If you guys have organized something, we're always open to coming and talking and hanging out. So I'll be sure to let you guys know if when we're heading that way, and I'd love to grab a pint with you.
That'd be great.
Good. We're not on islands.
Did that sound? Was that Australian? What you said? What'd you say?
A little bit Irish, but we'll let you off.
Irish, hey. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciated it.
Awesome. Thanks, Marshall. Thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Marshall.